In the year 1770, Captain Cook discovered the continent of Australia, a big island in the Pacific Ocean.
Wow, a new world!
The land was full of strange, unusual creatures and eucalyptus trees that the English had never seen before. Cook stamped Australia terra nullius, which meant that the land was empty, or no one lived there. The English in those days had the richest and most powerful empire in the world. The rich English pretty much owned everything, which left the poor people owning nothing. The prisons were jam-packed full because poor people would rather be thieves than die of starvation. These prisoners were called convicts, and now there was a perfect way to deal with them. So on the 13th of May, 1787, the English crammed 759 convicts onto 11 ships to set sail for the uninhabited land of Australia. For months the convicts breathed the foul air of their quarters and felt the great swell of the sea. The first convicts came ashore in Australia on the 26th of January, 1788, and they soon found the uninhabited land that Cook had found had a strange people uninhabiting it.
Hey, brother, thanks for discovering us.
And the few Aboriginals that didn't get shot, well, disease took them. At first, things were pretty damn miserable for the starving convicts and settlers of the new English colony down under, but the English prisons still were bursting with thousands of prisoners, and the English needed a place to dump them. For the next 70 years, over 160,000 convicts were sent to Australia. They were the dregs of British society, and the worst of them were the Irish convicts. The English did all sorts of things to help ruin the Australian environment and to make the place feel more like home. They introduced many new animals that were not a part of the Australian ecosystem. English settlements started to spread to other parts of Australia, and when the convicts stopped being sent, the English offered lots of unpaid work to Aborigines, Islanders, Chinese, and Indians. That was until 1851, when gold was discovered, and people from all over the world wanted to become Australians now. But to avoid contaminating their society, the English created an immigrant restriction because, well, they did find Australia first. And that's exactly the way things were until the late 1800s, when the son of an Irish convict named Ned Kelly had a little incident with a policeman at his home. He took off into the bush, and when the corrupt police couldn't find him, they arrested his mummy. The Kelly gang would murder policemen, rob banks and coaches, and had a price on his head greater than any other in the British Empire. That was until he was portrayed one night while at the pub, and his little ranging days were over. Towards the end of the 19th century, there were painters and writers in Australia who began to see things differently. They thought the Bushmen was unique. They were proud of the Australian struggle and their heritage. And in 1901, the separate colonies of Australia decided to get together and form an Australian Federation. Elections were held and elected its first Prime Minister, the Honourable Edmund Barton. This brings us to World War I, when the Australians realized how much they still loved their mother country, England, and handed over a generation of young men by creating the Anzacs. The Anzacs headed over for some training in Egypt, then off to attack Gallipoli in Turkey, a German ally. Unfortunately, in 1914, the men who ruled Europe were not as clever as the men who made the weapons. But through the struggle of the Anzac soldiers, Australia was forced as its own nation, a nation who lost a generation of young men, while the English generals commanded selflessly. A few soldiers returned home bravely to a nation that stood by them, but only for a few years when England was at war again. During the Second World War, Australian soldiers from day one fought in Europe, Greece, Crete, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and across the Mediterranean. That was until a greater threat to Australia came along, the Japanese. But not to worry, because the Americans, with their chocolate, Camel cigarettes, pantyhose, and smooth talking, swiftly came to save Australia and dropped a couple of bombs on Japan in the process. As for today in modern times, Australians share a very high quality of living.
Oh, Sharon, get us another beer from the Barbie.
They call this one the Bogan. They beat England in just about every sport, and even have made up some of their own. Australians have a great taste in music and enjoy recreational activities with their families. Australians still love to celebrate the Bushmen and their convict heritage and love the Australian environment. Australia, an unimportant land in a big, big world.
Hey, brother,